Good morning, Timothy.
Good morning,
It's
Maya.
good to see you.
You can see that I'm not on the good ship's antenna.
Indeed, I can see that, and you look very fresh and very upbeat today. So I'm happy to see that too. Thank you for being there this morning.
This
I
is
hope
day
that
two of
day
my
two.
10-day um, torturous detox. So if I'm a
Oh,
little bit peaked today, that's because I haven't had caffeine. And next week will be better.
next week I hope it will be, but I'm sure that today is going to be a great briefing. So yes. So next week you will look a little bit, just a little bit thinner. Yes.
Well, let's see if you can tell the difference.
Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so to everybody on Clubhouse and everybody who is watching us live, this is Japanese Politics with Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Esquire. So this is a consultancy in downtown Tokyo. I- yes, 106. Yes. Thank you for the thank you for the prompt. Yes, this is our 106th episode, and it is delivered to you by Japan Expert Insights. And of course, if you're watching us on LinkedIn, you can subscribe there or follow us there, subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on Clubhouse as well. Timothy, I don't want to keep you waiting because I know that if I do that, yeah, some strange things might happen. Yes. So, without any further ado, please let me give you the mic or the floor,
Thank
whatever
you.
you go.
Thank you, Maya. And congratulations, 106. Are we past the 2-year mark yet?
We have, yes.
Okay. Well, it's cause for some form of celebration or something like that. And I'm just toying it in my mind, maybe organizing on a kind of a commensuration of this anniversary, that we do
Mhm.
something together as a group for the people that are here in Japan, or maybe like Ren, people who are traveling to Japan from time to get together and to meet each other face to face. And so thinking about what kind of venue and what kind of activity that might look like. But anyway, it's a thought that we should pursue, I think.
Yes, I agree with you, and I'm willing to do that. Let's think about it. I am, yes, I think that it could be probably somewhere in late April or May.
Yep. Yep.
Yes. So, yeah.
Politics is hot, and politics will be hot then. Actually, it'll be probably hotter then than it is right now. But let me bring everybody up to speed in anticipation of that gathering. Um, yeah, I'm not
Great.
quite sure what it would look like, but in any event, we have a great audience. We have a loyal audience. A lot of people have stuck with us from the very beginning, and we've picked up new people on the way who are interested in what's going on in contemporary Japanese politics that's important to you, that it kind of telegraphing what's going to happen. And that's what this show focuses on. So for those of you that are attending, thank you very much for joining. And I hope you'll join us every week. We try and keep this to a 30-minute briefing. So let me get onto it right away. Maya, we
Let's,
always start with talking about Mr. Kishida, the prime minister. If it wasn't Mr. Kishida, we would still talk about the prime minister because of the hierarchical structure of Japanese politics. So the prime minister is suffering a bit, as you saw from my note when we announced this briefing on LinkedIn, that somebody's raining on his parade. It looks like a lot of people are raining on his parade. He's suffering a lot from uh, low polling numbers. There's not a new poll out this week. There was a poll out last week that put his numbers at around 26% approval rating for his cabinet. The next poll that will come out is perhaps next week or the week after that, which will be a more definitive assessment of the prime minister personally and um, maybe subsidiarily his cabinet. So it usually comes in a focus on the prime minister, and then the next poll comes out on cabinet approval. So there is a little bit of shifting there. There has been no loss of cabinet members over the last 3 months, which is great for the prime minister because he lost 4 in the first 2 months of in 2 months after the election of the upper house late last year. So he's trying to keep things calm. He's trying to keep scandals down. He's got a little bit of an issue with this magazine, Bunshun, which is always in hot pursuit. They have dug up something again this week that is irritating to the prime minister, and also, a distraction to him and what he's trying to achieve. So we are in the 122nd session of the Diet. It started on January 10th. It'll go until June 21st. And in that period of time, there'll be G7, there'll be by-elections for 4 members of the lower house, and then there will be elections, local municipal elections for about 27% of municipal and city and prefectural individuals, including governors, mayors, and assemblymen. So you've got that going on. And then on April 1st, he needs to pass this budget, the largest budget that Japan has considered in post-war history. That's what they're working on right now. The Diet is in session. The lower house budget committee is full almost every day, all day long, considering the budget. So that means that the prime minister, the questions are provided in advance, so they know which cabinet ministers need to be in attendance, not the full contingent. But it's broadcast on television every day, and you can see people squirming. You can see people pointing their finger and, not yelling, but, being very direct with the prime minister and with members of his cabinet and sometimes bureaucrats on what in the hell are you doing? What is your intention? What did this mean? And for example, the prime minister for 8 hours sat in the budget hearing on Tuesday. He was grilled the entire time by members of not only the opposition, but 3 members of his own LDP on what's going on, what he intends to do about it. So there's pressure that's being applied out from the outside and also from the inside of the LDP. So there's a little bit of tension that's going on there, not a little bit, but the lid is tried to be kept on so that it doesn't spill over and people are mollified and issues are addressed to the degree that it kind of calms them, doesn't resolve them. One of the issues that came up this last week, you might remember 2 weeks ago, if you're listening every week to this program, that the prime minister's son was identified as going on a shopping spree, going and buying gifts for people that the prime minister would give when he came back from his Six Nation tour. He was using the embassy car, as you would expect, and out buying gifts, kind of as you might not expect. And that became a big issue in the first 2 days of Diet hearings. It occupied questioning time. Typically, the questioning members of the opposition or for the LDP, they're given a time slot and questions that they can direct Q&A back and forth. Within that time frame, they need to cover their issues. So it's rather cleverly crafted what their questions are and the responses that come back, because it eats up that time. So the members use this time very, very strategically. But to have part of that time occupied by what in the hell is your son doing buying gifts when he was in Paris? What's going on with that? So that came an issue last week. This issue this week, as reported in the favorite rag Bunshun, is that the prime minister's son, 32-year-old Shotaro, was observed going into a love hotel with a university student, probably 24 years old. So they followed him. They're tagging him. They did this in Paris. They did this in London, in the United States as well, and pursued him quietly to see what he was doing so that they could report on it. So there are elements within Japanese political economy that are just against the prime minister. They don't like him. They want him to leave. They don't like his policies. So there is that faction, that arm, and it consists not only of the opposition parties who are almost united on that, but it also concerns people within his own party, people who would like to be prime minister pretty quick. So please get out of the way. Anyway, this issue with the prime minister's son is interesting because it involves, his structure, how he runs his meetings, how he organizes his life. And so, as you know, I was a Diet secretary too. His son was his Diet secretary before he became prime minister, actually while he was foreign minister. And this is something of a natural progression. Many politicians do that. Mr. Suga didn't do it. Mr. Abe didn't do it. Neither of them have any children. And the last time it was done was by Yasuo Fukuda, who's when he was prime minister during 2007, 2008, and his son was his diet secretary, and he brought him into the fold while he was prime minister. And now his son is a very prominent politician. Yasu has since retired. And he is one of those he's not a faction leader. He is one of those individuals that is key within the Seiwakai in the former Abe faction. He's a little bit younger than some of the other contenders, but he is, by political heritage, related to former Prime Minister Fukuda, who was one of the essential components of building Seiwakan into the force that it is now, the largest faction within the LDP, consisting of 98 members. And as you know, 98 is, the next highest number is Mr. Motegi, which is at maybe 57. So that is a huge force. So for this diet secretary staff to be supporting the prime minister, when you become prime minister, you get to select an executive secretary, and you have pretty much flexibility in deciding who that's going to be. Usually it's a bureaucrat who is trained and seeped in Japanese politics and policy making. And when the prime minister brought his son in, he had to relieve a really seasoned individual, Ministry of Industry and Trade bureaucrat, relieve him, push him out, who was, it was somewhat shocking, to bring his son in. And they usually have one of these executive secretaries for policy affairs, and then they have another 6 secretaries that are basically helping the prime minister run his office. But in the cabinet office, there are about 500 individuals. So it's a big organization. The chief cabinet secretary is taking a lot of that responsibility. But for the prime minister, he's got these 6 or 7 people. The prime minister today has 2 executive secretaries, his son and another bureaucrat. And these other diet secretaries that are helping the prime minister almost all come from, they're seconded from various ministries. So they're not handpicked by the prime minister. They're sort of handpicked by the prime minister, but not from being diet secretaries. They're actually bureaucrats that work in various important ministries. So as you can see, when the prime minister goes to a briefing or when he's out in public, he's usually followed by 3 or 4 or 5 other people, in addition to the special police who are always assigned to him. And so the information and the movement of the prime minister is always filtered with these diet secretaries, these executive secretaries for the prime minister, to the various ministries too. So the power shift and the power sharing, it never ceases. The prime minister is at the head, the pinnacle of the government, but the various ministries are also attached to that. So that's how the Japanese prime minister's office operates. And the fact that he appoints his son, it does suggest nepotism, which is distasteful to many people, but it is somewhat of a feature of Japanese politics. It's not unheard of. And many diet secretaries who are eldest sons of the members of parliament, sometimes even just the second or the third son, because the first son has done something more elaborate to keep the family name, and the second or the third son assumes that role to help dad. But it happens quite a bit. They assume the position. They become a candidate when their father begins to get close to retirement, and then that it's not a feature that's unique to Japan. It happens all over the world, but it does get a little bit of focus from time to time. This time, the focus is not just because of his eldest son, but also because of one of the other diet secretaries who was just fired this week, which is another person raining on the prime minister's parade. So what happened was there was on Tuesday, when the prime minister was in 8 hours of questions and answers, the issue of LGBT came up, and he gave a couple of comments about what the policy is, what his impression or intention is with regard to legislation for joint sex marriages and current discrimination against LGBT members in Japanese society. And it was somewhat curious, somewhat heated. And for background, the next day, one of his secretaries, a young fellow by the name of, hold on, what's his name? Masayoshi Arai. He was making comments off record to supplement what the prime minister had said. And inside the cabinet office, he was having a press briefing with members of the press, probably not for attribution, but he did say something along the lines, personally, if somebody LGBT was living next to me, I wouldn't like it. And I'd probably never interact with them. And that was published and released, attributed to him the next day. It caused a huge brouhaha. And it didn't help matters that the ambassador to the United States, Rahm Emanuel, and Komeito, and a senior bureaucrat from the United States with responsibility for LGBT issues was meeting as well, talking about the importance of passing legislation to acknowledge LGBT as a policy statement from the prime minister in legislation before G7. So that's a pretty aggressive thing to happen. And also in this environment for the secretary, one of 6 diet secretaries, to say something kind of off the cuff, it really caused a headache, and he was fired immediately. So once again, he just doesn't want it to happen, but it happens just because things happen. That once again, his character or his management or his decisiveness is called into question at a time when he wants to focus on passing the budget and building a case for this election that's going to happen in April. And in the meantime, these questions that are devoted to his son and to these LGBT comments, they detract from getting the budget necessary and getting it prepared for passage. They have to finish the budget process in the lower house by the 27th of this month in order to give it to the upper house. As the law works here in Japan, they pass the budget in the lower house, they push it up to the upper house considers it, and they need to pass it as well. And then it comes back down and it becomes law. If it doesn't pass in the upper house, it comes back down to the lower house for reconsideration. And if it is passed again, then it becomes law. So there's a little bit of cushion, but not very much. The 27th of this month, and then it needs to be passed on April 1st, which is about 30 days after it's supposed to pass here. So the lower house has it for 30 days. The upper house has it potentially for 30 days, but it could be less than that. And then it's put for a vote and becomes law on April 1st. He's got to do that. And everything that's a distraction from that really pulls things down. So it's not just LGBT legislation. Mr. Hagiura, as you might recall, is the policy affairs chief within the LDP. He's also one of the key contenders for taking leadership over from the Seiwakai, the former Abe faction. He wanted 60 bills passed this session. It's not an enormous amount. It's somewhat regular in anticipation of the election and because of passing the budget. So some of the bills that they're considering is not just LGBT, but it's also extending the usable life of nuclear reactors from the current 40 years to 60 years. So that means that these nuclear reactors that were built, some of them 20 years ago, they need to go through a process of being recertified. And typically, in the past, it was given a 40-year life term. So that was the analysis they did when they first built these, on analysis of the concrete and all of the materials that were used to build the reactors. And now they're pushing that out to 60 years. So it's a little bit curious, makes you wonder about, the safety and the durability of these reactors. But if they're good for 60 years, now you would have thought that maybe when they first built them, they would have said they were good for 60 years. In any event, the LGBT remark and Mr. Kishida's son's issue are distraction on getting a lot of these bills going, and also passing the budget. The budget, by the way, is the largest, as I said, in post-war history. It is just enormous, and it consists not only of extra spending because of COVID and COVID repair, but also because the economy is beginning to tank, and there's supplementary bills to take care of gasoline and fuel prices. But also, no matter what the prime minister does, the price of consumables and consumer goods is rising, and they've already signed off on price rises for gas and for heating oil that will go into effect in the spring. So they're waiting for the cold period to end, and then when it gets into the spring season, then they're going to raise those prices rather dramatically. It looks like maybe 30%. So if you're following this sort of thing, you'll notice that many of the companies have now applied for and received permission to increase their prices. Coca-Cola announced it. Many of the soft drinks and the beer manufacturers have also announced price increases, sometimes 12 to 15%. And they get that approval, and then that will go into effect relatively soon, probably before spring is full on us. So the question of where we are with consumer prices and inflation just continues to get worse and worse. So passing this budget and making sure that he looks good, he looks clean, he looks like he is able to continue the process of being prime minister is foremost in his mind. He's got some challenges there, and not only does he have challenges, but he has some contenders within the LDP that would rather like someone else in that position like themselves. So the other issue that comes up from time to time is, I get this question quite a bit. Hey, Langley, when is there going to be an election? You know, maybe a snap election or something like that. So the next kind of appropriate time, if there was going to be a October surprise, as it would be called here, April surprise perhaps, is in the elections on the 23rd of April. So there's several elections that are going on there. There's the by-election, and then there's the municipal election. And there could be a chance to also throw in election of the lower house at the same time. That would be kind of getting an economy of scale. It would make a certain amount of sense for those who really want it. But I don't think the prime minister wants it, because it could be that he doesn't survive it. And they elect a new prime minister as a result of that election. And that would mean in May for G7, the prime minister wouldn't be the host, even though it would be in Hiroshima, the current prime minister's home base, where G7 will be held. So it looks a little bit awkward there. And not only that, but the LDP has about 35 seats that they haven't appointed somebody to take the position. So that takes time. They've got to get candidates. I'm sure there are people who are raising their hand, but they're being vetted, and they're being compared to other potential candidates. But 35 seats is a lot to have still undecided now with everything else that's going on. So the prime minister and the LDP has a lot on their plate. They don't need any distractions, and they're meeting every day to pass this budget. So there's a lot going on there. I'd like to move on to other things that are also relevant to that. The Bank of Japan, as you know, the governor of the Bank of Japan, Mr. Kuroda Haruhiko, is scheduled to, his term is scheduled to end on April 8th. The budget is passed on April 1st. He resigns on April 8th. The new person, the new governor of Japan, will be selected in February. We're in February now. Today is what, February 12th? So this month, the candidates for the replacement of Mr. Kuroda will be introduced. And here's a big brouhaha. There were two deputy governors that have been supporting Mr. Kuroda, and they were seen as the two top contenders for this role. over the last weekend, there was one of the deputy governors who was kind of announced as the top candidate, and immediately he said, "No, it's not going to be me. I'm going to do something else. I don't want the job. I don't want that position." So that poured a lot of cold water, and maybe the reason why he said that was because it was announced probably as a trial balloon, and the stock market tanked a little bit as a consequence of that announcement. So apparently the stock market calibrates the selection of this individual. His name is Shinichi Uchida, uh, deputy governor, as the next governor, and it caused a reaction. So he's out. The next contender is the other deputy governor, and he's already accepted a position elsewhere. So it looks like when you look at the environment a little bit closely, nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to replace Mr. Kuroda because they understand what a hellstorm this is going to be. They need to transition from the ultra loose money policy, keeping inflation at about 2% and missing that target over the last year and a half under Mr. Kuroda, to shift gears here and help Mr. Kishida generate more vitality into the market here through a bunch of techniques. So as I predicted 2 weeks ago, I think, Maya, a dark horse has come up. It's a professor at one of the women's universities, Koritsu Women's Educational Institute. He's a professor there. He's written a couple of books.
Yes.
He looks like the number one contender now, Maya. It looks like he will be introduced.
It looks so. It's also in the news quite. I think that last week they talked a lot about it, and of course, a lot of people seem to be surprised about that. But yes, you predicted that actually a couple of weeks ago. So what
Yep.
can I say? Yeah.
Well, what can I say? So it looks like that decision will be made this week. So that's something to look forward to. That's something that will be, as they say from the press secretary's position in the White House, top of mind in our briefing next week. So we've got that going on, and it's instructive who the prime minister selects. What is going to happen with the yen value, with the economic dealings of the Bank of Japan, which is a huge issue. So we'll keep our eye on that and report to you as developments occur. The next issue I'd like to talk about is the Philippines. You know, there was a state visit. They just left yesterday. A big delegation. Ferdinand Marcos, not Ferdinando Marcos because he's dead, but his grandson, Ferdinand Marcos, a state visit, his wife, a delegation of politicians, and a huge business delegation was in Japan for 5 days. State visit, they met with the emperor and the empress. They had a state dinner on, I think, a Thursday night. And this is indicative of not just the Philippines, but also it's a flow out of the 2+2 strategy that is being pursued by the United States. The Minister of Defense and the foreign minister meeting regularly, and it's not just the Quad, but it's a lot of countries that are developing this relationship, defense and foreign ministry, where they have this coalition of forces and building this kind of wall as a deterrent against China. And it is on what would you say? It's on rockets, not to use a bad analogy given what's going on in North Korea. But this coalition of forces hadn't really included publicly too much what's going on in the Philippines. And it is now appears that the Philippines is a key feature in this deterrence, this bulwark of defense and deterrence capabilities of like-minded countries against Taiwan, North Korea, and Russia. So the lines are being drawn very quickly. It was a great mission as far as the Philippines is concerned. They've raised their profile, and Japan has concluded 6 agreements with the Philippines, not just in terms of land development and infrastructure development, but also in terms of defense and reciprocal access. So there are 2 things that are going on: extended integrated deterrence, which is pretty much, I think, motored by the United States so that its allies are sharing more of the responsibility. There was a great article this week in the Japan Times about this deterrence by Glasser. What's his name? A friend's article appeared, I think, on Tuesday on the emerging role of the Philippines and why the Philippines and why the United States needs to develop this kind of integrated strategy. So in the past, the United States was driven in the aftermath of the kind of Cold War to be the global policeman and to keep things in mold, but having, you know, the largest military and the largest foreign affairs apparatus, and they've got to move away from that. They've got to delegate more of the responsibility, the hosting of defense capabilities to these allies, and also to have reciprocal access agreements. So that's on octane right now, as you might have followed. So the United States has reciprocal access under the Status of Forces Agreement that was signed 40 years ago, 50 years ago, with Japan, that allows U.S. troops to be stationed in Japan and for them to host weapons here and facilities and port facilities and staging, that sort of thing. So up until just this last year, the United States was only the only country that had that ability, that facility with the United States. And when the Prime Minister traveled on his six-nation tour just this last month, he signed an agreement with Britain to have reciprocal access there. The Australians are also in line to get that, but the Prime Minister just signed reciprocal access agreements this week with the Philippines. So that means that there's a sharing of forces, there's a sharing of training and capabilities that are supposed to be somewhat unitized, and a lot of joint war games and exercises that go as a consequence of that. So that kind of underpins or explains after the fact the reason why the United States, they don't, it's supposed to be a decision by the Japanese government to increase their defense spending from 1% to 2%, but I think it is at the urging of the United States, and it's not limited just to Japan. I think the Philippines also is being encouraged to increase their defense spending. So this 2% figure, NATO qualifying figure, 2% of GDP devoted to defense, not everybody does it. You might remember President Trump was chafing at that and wagging his finger at the UN nations, at the European nations, for not living up to that, and he's going to withdraw support. And now they're pretty much ponying up because the threats are actually growing quite high. But this relationship between Japan and the Philippines is really going to flourish in the next coming years, and I think it's quicker than that. So in terms of sharing defense capabilities, the Japanese have given many coastal vessels to the Philippines for guarding and for policing their waters, but it's going to be a little bit more rambunctious now. And so you can look forward to the Philippines and Japan being much closer, more exchanges, perhaps in terms of people and tourism, but also in terms of logistics, supply chain, chips and condensers, and military capabilities as well. Along the lines of chips, you might have recalled that Japan was under some pressure by the United States to restrict chip access to China, and they followed that. There was a lot of resistance within the chip manufacturing industry. So Japan, the industry, Keidanren, needs to follow what government and foreign policy dictates to them, but it's a free market. They're supposed to be able to do what they can do. But with regard to chip manufacturers, wafer manufacturers, that sort of thing, Japan excels in producing the machines that produce those products. So it's not so much that Japan is producing the products and selling them. Most of the higher end chip manufacturing occurs in Taiwan and in South Korea. Japan is significant in producing the machines that make those, and the machines that make those machines that make those. So it's a big hit to the economy to withdraw that kind of supply of service and sales, and they do a robust business to China. But in light of the balloon controversy, I'm sure you followed the balloon that traversed the United States last week. Actually, it was shot down, I think, on Tuesday of this week. But on our show, we were talking about it because it had been identified on Saturday. It was traversing the United States. Secretary Anthony Blinken, was scheduled to fly to China on Sunday, and probably he was watching our show and decided not to go because of the balloon controversy. So he didn't go, and so the China relationship with the United States is now kind of on tenterhooks, and Japan suffers as a consequence of that. So not only are the chip manufacturers being not punished, but they're being enforced. Don't be selling these advanced machines and technologies to China anymore. We've taken a look at some of the equipment that has fallen out of the sky that were assigned to the balloon, and we found markings of products that are made in the United States and exported, and also in Japan, that are exported to support this kind of spine strategy that the Chinese have been pursuing for years, actually. It has become apparent that this is not the first time. It's just not a fluke. It's been going on for quite a while, not just in the United States, but also in Japan. So the chips, whenever there's something that happens geopolitically, it frequently impacts the economy pretty quickly, and impacting the chip manufacturers is a big deal. So moving TSMC, making their wafer manufacturing here in Kumamoto and also in Arizona is a big deal. So these Japanese manufacturers of these specialized machines is hoped to be facilitated or actually replenished by those initiatives and withdrawn from China. At the same time, the ministry, the foreign ministry, restricted Chinese tourists from coming into Japan over the last 3 months. There was almost a blanket. They restricted it by having them jump through several hoops. 72 hours before you depart, you need to have a proof of non-COVID, and then when you come in, you have to have another test. And so it really restricted Chinese tourists from coming in, and they're lifting that ban now. So there's a push, and then there's a withdrawal, and there's this testing that constantly goes on. So it looks like the Chinese tourists will be coming in more robust form in March. But also, I think there's a wide recognition, this is your area actually, Maya, that the Chinese, without the Chinese tourists as a component of this influx that we expect of tourism, it just doesn't work. They consist of about 34% of all of the tourists that come to Japan, and they spend.
And they spend a lot, yes, indeed. So yes, a lot of people in the travel industry here are actually looking forward to the return of the Chinese visitors. And of course, the next will be, the South Korean visitors as well, and other people, other tourists from Southeast Asian countries. But yes, this year we are going to see really an even larger influx of foreign visitors. So hopefully, the industry will once again gain momentum. Who knows?
Yeah. Speaking of South Korea, there is a robust tourism trade between South Korea and Japan. The Japanese love to go to South Korea. They go there on shopping sprees. They can go over the weekend and come back, and it's just almost a 1 hour flight there. And also, Korean tourists love to come to Japan and pick up many of the products they have here. But the two countries at the personal level are really good. At the political level, it's rather tenuous.
Tenuous indeed. Yes, we have seen that. And I think that also Korean corporations that work with Japan, and the Japanese companies that work with Korea, there is no bad blood there.
Yeah.
Everything is fine. It's just politics.
It's just politics. And although I don't want to dwell on it in this briefing too much, but the issue of repatriation or reparations for the people who suffered under Japanese colonial rule is still unsettled. And they have a strategy, Korean organization that is set up, funded by Korea, funded by Japan, to relinquish these claims. It is on again, off again. The Japanese don't feel like they need to contribute money. They've already done that. So it looks like it will be supplied by the Koreans, and the Koreans don't like that because they say, you know, we haven't received an apology from these two companies, Mitsui Mining and Heavy Steel, Mitsui Steel, and we want them to apologize and we want them to pay reparations because they actually employed slave labor while they were doing this production, and that's indisputable. But those claims were resolutely concluded at the end of the war and in agreements that were signed around 1964 or so. But it's a continuing irritation to making these two countries, the closest countries, right?
Yeah, indeed. And I think we can expect that these, irritations will continue. So depending on the political regimes, or let's say cabinets in the country. So they are here to stay, unfortunately. But
Yes, I agree with you. Not to focus on South Korea or even talk about North Korea too much, although there was a celebration, 75 years of the establishment of the military. They had a huge parade. Our great leader had his daughter attending with him, and in the parade were 11 solid fuel, massive ICBMs. It was the first time for them to be on display. Apparently, they were dummies. They weren't the real thing because that would be actually kind of dangerous, but to show the people where the company is going. So solid fuel rockets for ICBMs is a very scary thing. The reason why these are such an advancement in technology is because they can be stored and launched relatively quickly. The liquid fueled rockets require time to get set up and then fueled and then launched, but the solid fuel rockets are easily concealed and then launched rather quickly. And they're ICBMs, so they can reach, these new ones, looks like they can reach just about any place in the world. So the last critical component is the payload, which, we're waiting for that shoe to fall that the North Koreans launch their next nuclear test. We expected it might have been at the 75th anniversary, as they usually wait for some event to culminate, but it wasn't. It was this display of the ICBMs instead. So we still are waiting for that. Anyway, I want to move on to once again to the Philippines. Maya, you've heard of the Luffy robbery ring, right?
right, yes, it became a big issue a couple of weeks ago. In the media, although it had been going on for quite a while before that.
Quite a while. So these four suspects, the four kingpins, are now back in Japan. Two of them came on Wednesday. The other two came, I think, on Friday. Interestingly, as the president of the Philippines was on a state visit here, so it was something of a gift, I think, to bring these guys into the Japanese police and court system. It's a big deal. These four guys, while they were in detention, they've been in detention since September of 2019. They have been in detention, and they have run this scam of a couple of scams in that entire time while in detention, while they are kind of under arrest. So it really reveals the underbelly of the Philippine police system, where you can bring things in, you can bring contraband in, you can bring telephones in if you just paid the guards off. So this was a huge deal. The Japanese have known about this for quite a while. They haven't been able to do anything about it because, number one, there's no extradition treaty between Japan and the Philippines. And number two, these fellows were already arrested for crimes that they had committed or apparently committed or are accused of having committed in the Philippines. So in order for them to be released to the Japanese authorities, they have to go and through the court system in the Philippines for the crimes that they committed there first. And if they're supposed to do time, then do their time and then be released to Japan if that's the way it's done. Many times these crimes are orchestrated. They're not really committed, but they have victims who complain about it, so that they are prevented from actually being deported to Japan. So these four guys, and it's not just four, there's lots of them, but you might remember the Ori Ori Denwa, Maya?
Oh yes, yes, definitely. It was also a problem that everybody here in Japan had to deal with, and it's still quite strong. I think you can get a lot of phone calls, especially directed to senior people, and yeah, single senior people. Yeah.
So
So
they found a weakness in Japanese culture, and they've exploited that really eloquently. So what Ori Ori Denwa is they call up I guess they have telephone lists of the elderly people in Japan, and then they call them. They say, "Hey, mom, it's me," and the old person, if it's a mom or a dad, she answers the phone. She says, what is that you, Taro? Yeah, it's me, Taro. Oh, what's up, son? I haven't seen you for so long. Mom, I'm in trouble. I need you to send me some money. I'm in real trouble. Please go down to the 7-Eleven and send me some money quickly, right? So that went on for years, and it became a big issue. It was publicized in the newspapers and on television, and people were taught how to deal with that. And as a result of that, actually the safety value of Japan became more restricted, and people became a little bit more fearful of people that were knocking on the door, or the delivery services from Amazon or from Takubin coming in, or even the food that is delivered from the grocery stores or from the restaurants. As a result of COVID, people are becoming more insular and more afraid because of these crimes. So they took it up to another level, and they had individuals. They formed teams, these four guys, but like I said, there are other groups. This one is just one of the most prevalent ones. And they would organize guys in Japan to form teams. They didn't know each other first, but they were organized to join. And you're going to hit this house because our information says it's an old lady that has it. She's got a lot of money either in the safe, or she's got assets there. So you go there, you intimidate the hell out of her, you tie her up, and you get whatever money you can. And then you report back to us. We'll give you 15 or 20 or 30% of that, and the rest of it you pool. These guys, over the last 3 years, have extracted more than 6 billion yen, which is about $46 million through this scam. Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? So
it
a very
is.
successful scam, a successful technique. And you've got to imagine that the way they were able to do that is part of this $47 million that they were generating, part of it was being distributed to the guards and that sort of thing. So it was very difficult for the Japanese Justice Ministry to get these guys and to get the Philippines to relinquish them. So what they had to do was solve the crimes that they had committed. So they actually canceled them out. They were relieved of the crimes, these four guys. There were first two and then the next two, and they had more difficulty with the second two, the real kingpins. So I think they had agreements with the victims not to relinquish their claims, and eventually they were able to do that. I mean, it is the Philippines, so money speaks really loudly. So the four are now in custody, and there will be much more emphasis on that. And with the relationship flourishing between the Philippines and Japan, it looks like maybe there will be a cap put on this, and at least more of a facilitation on resolving crime. As I reported last year, Maya, crime has spiked in Japan at the end of COVID. So there's more crime now than there was even before COVID started. So it looks like there was a pent-up demand to knock somebody on the head, or to stab them, or to slice them, or to stalk them. So there is an influx in crime, the agency
Indeed.
has reported.
Indeed.
Have you been stalked, Maya, or knocked on the head?
Well, not yet. So I hope I won't be.
Okay,
Yeah.
so but for normal people, it is an impact. The safety factor, people in Japan, they're well known to be risk averse and also just afraid of a lot of things. Abunai, don't cross the street, raise your hand, watch the signals. So it's a very kind of what would you say? It's a very
One.
tentative.
Oh,
Yes.
tentative, yes. So a
Um,
lot of people here feel that, yes.
they feel that fear very quickly. So sales of items for safety, cameras, glass that a film that you put on your glass so it can't be broken. A lot of issues. Tokyo Hands is selling out products. Some of these companies, these stores that are selling security devices, security issues, have
Mm.
noticed a six-fold increase in sales as a consequence of this these loopy uh, uh,
The
crime that is,
scammers, the
yes, that
crowd.
has been
Mm.
really revealed over the last 2 or 3 weeks. But it's important because it has, social implications, it has legal implications, it has geopolitical implications with just the exit of the Philippine delegation yesterday. So it is something that we want to keep an eye on and report to you. There are 2 or 3 other issues. I know I'm going a little bit long, Maya, forgive me for that. But inflation, wages are up. Big news, wages are up 0.1% for January. And so everybody is, raising their hands in celebration. Actually, it's just the government and maybe the finance ministry that's raising their hands. Maybe the Bank of Japan governor, Mr. Kuroda, is happy about that, but 0.1% wages is really not something to celebrate. But it is after 8 months of declining wage value. So even though the wages have stayed the same, because of inflation, rising inflation, the wage value has decreased for 8 consecutive months. This is the first time that it's shown any kind of positive um, uh, uptick, but it is not sustained. It is not going to continue. They know that because this is all based on the year-end bonuses that companies pay their employees. So as a result of that, they might have gotten a kick in their salary because of the winter bonus. They received that in December, so it's revealed in January. The numbers are only coming out now. So there is a prediction that once again the wages will be decreased next month. And not only that, but the consumer price index is just continuing to fall. Household spending is down 1.3% compared to the uptick in wages, but it's predicted to actually be more restrictive. And you can't jigger the economy. You can't make it more robust if consumers aren't spending. The consumer spending is more than half of the GDP that's generated. So companies are generating it too, but the fact that people are out buying things, they're enjoying the economy, they're building houses, they're buying refrigerators, they're getting clothes, that sort of thing. That's the largest component of driving the Japanese economy. And if you're not facilitating that with higher wages, the economy is going to stall. And that's the prediction, not only here in Japan, but it's a prediction for a global recession later this year. So it's something that we're continually keeping an eye on. And as I said earlier, fuel and commodity prices are scheduled to rise. Many commodities, everyday commodities, have already requested, the companies have requested increases in their prices. That used to never happen. And now I think because of the pent up demand, the increase that has been requested and the increase that is being authorized by the consumer affairs or maybe by the Japanese government in some form or manner is really, it's like 10% or 15%, sometimes 20%. Fuel prices for electricity and fuel is going to be more like 30%. So it is a huge impact to the economy. Kyoto, Maya, I don't think you heard this yet. Kyoto is going to host the Cultural Affairs Agency. Did you know that?
Well, this is the first time I did actually. So that is a surprise.
It,
And
it,
so
it
you're talking about the agency and not the ministry. So because I think that these are two different institutions, or
so the Japanese government initiated a conversation with all of the municipalities throughout Japan with
Mhm.
the idea of accepting different bodies within the central government. They're trying to push this out so that the central government is not so focused on Tokyo. As you know, and because of a lot of demographics and that sort of thing, there's the impact of 1010, which we discussed, which is a
Right.
gerrymandering thing that is going to become more obvious as we move into the next general election of the lower house. Um, but also with regard to this concentration of young people in the major cities, Osaka, Tokyo, Fukuoka, Sapporo. The younger people don't want to be out where grandma and grandpa are. They don't want to have a life near the farm or near the old. They want to be trendy. They want to be where the action is. They want to be where the jobs are. And so the government is attempting, and they've foreseen this for years, to move some of these areas out. And that's why Tsukuba was created. As you know, Tsukuba was created as an alternative to having the capital in Tokyo. Tsukuba is about 1 hour away. They made a train line directly to Tsukuba, and they've got great facilities there, wide boulevards, a lot of area for construction, and a lot of the research and development and the universities are out there. But that's in preparation for if there were something to happen to Tokyo, that there's a viable alternative. But they've continued that in having the local areas kind of bid or suggest, we would like to host this agency or this research institution in our area. They made bids for that. And a lot of these bids were accepted. And one of the bids, there was only one bid for moving an agency of the Japanese government, and that was Kyoto. Kyoto proposed a couple of years ago that they move the Cultural Affairs Ministry to Kyoto, and that was accepted, and it's going to happen in March. So it's right here. We're just learning about this March. So what that means is that the Cultural Affairs Ministry, which is located in Kasumigaseki, as you would imagine, is going to move to Kyoto. They have a building there. It is a former police headquarters. The police headquarters built a new police headquarters, and they've got this building, and then they're going to build a building next to it. And this will be the Cultural Affairs Agency. Going on from March. So they've done a lot of analysis about, they still need to have facilitation with Tokyo. Some of the guys need to travel back and forth to Tokyo. They've done an analysis on that, how many millions of yen it's going to require, and they've accepted that. Almost all of them are going to be going to Kyoto. There are two divisions that will stay in Tokyo for a brief period of time, and one of those is with regard to the Unification Church scandal. So that is under the Cultural Affairs Agency, as you might know. The investigation on what they were doing, how they were just indoctrinating civilians and also trading babies. You might know that they were involved in that, having members of their organization give birth, and then when the baby was born, giving it to another member of the church. And so this investigation continues now. It is likely that the Cultural Affairs Ministry will recommend to the court that the Unification Church is chastised as being a non-church entity, and that classification will be withdrawn from them. But until then, they will probably be located in Tokyo. But March is right here, and this is a massive movement. And the reason why it's important for us to talk about it here, Maya, is because it is something of it's a trial, but I think it is something that is going to happen depending on how successful this transition occurs. So if it's the Cultural Affairs that goes to Kyoto, it is a test. It's not only a test of can we do that? Can we kind of detach from Tokyo and still carry on our duties? And I think they can. But it's also a test of the digital agency, which is trying to amalgamate all of the technical uses of all of these ministries so that they don't have different silos, that they're all speaking the same language, they have the same access, the same encryption. And I think this is the direction that the Japanese government is going, that soon, if the Cultural Affairs Ministry is successful in this, so it's a big deal, then other ministries will follow. There might be a ministry that goes to Nagoya. In fact, Konotaro was suggesting that at one time, that the Cultural Affairs Ministry should be relocated to Nagoya. And yes, it didn't quite take on the power that he suggested, but I think you're going to see more and more of that happening, and it's something to look forward to, I think.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, I really am curious how this will evolve. And because there are quite a few governmental agencies that have the potential of, or can be moved out of town. So,
well, it's also It's
Yeah.
also kind of uplifting because Kyoto is, in fact, the cultural capital of Japan. But this is the first time since the Meiji Restoration that an agency has been moved out of Tokyo. Since Meiji, it was all collected here into Tokyo. So there was a centralization of power for the last 100 years. So this is the first time that an agency has actually moved out. So it is significant and something that we should watch closely.
Indeed. Yes.
Big deal. Finally, Maya, I'd like to talk about COVID and masking.
All right. Okay, let's talk about that. Oh, my dear.
Okay. So as we reported last month, or actually last week, the government has decided that in May 13th, the regulations and the treatment of COVID will change. The regulations will change and things will be different. But now things are actually picking up a lot of steam. We've got the graduation ceremonies for university students in April, because of course everything starts and ends in April. So graduation ceremonies in April and May, and the government is considering, I think they've already acquiesced, that at these graduation ceremonies, you don't have to wear masks. And for restaurants, they're beginning to take instructions, or actually they're reading the tea leaves, and I think they're relinquishing the masking instructions for inside restaurants as well, in anticipation of May 13th. But I think we're very quickly going to this area where masks are not going to be required. COVID restrictions are going to go down. There's been set up another body. It is a kind of the precursor to an agency being developed to deal with the next pandemic. So I guess there is an acknowledgement that these pandemics will happen from time to time. So under the auspices of the chief cabinet secretary, he's got yet another obligation, which is to man and to oversee the creation of this new agency for the next pandemic. And in light of that, the restrictions on this current pandemic, which is not a pandemic anymore, they've taken it from a pandemic issue, which is a class 2, to a class 5, which is basically a flu. So I think the prime minister has acknowledged that the economy is first and foremost. We need to get people out spending money. We've got a global recession that is approaching us. Japan is going to be hit with that one way or the other, and we've got to kind of, help reduce the impact of what we already know is going to be happening with regard to consumer prices, with energy costs, and mounting tensions between Taiwan and China, Japan and North Korea, and with Russia and everybody else in the world. So there's a lot going on with COVID. You got anything to add to that, Maya?
Um,
Springing it
well,
on you, sorry.
yes. Well, basically, there is some news out a little bit more, if you allow me to add to that,
Sure.
from March the 13th, they're going to actually allow students in classrooms not to wear masks. But still, they are not going to request people not to wear them. They're going to say that, the schools or anyway, the people who want to wear the masks are still free to do that. But, well,
And that's our policy on this show. I know that most people are not wearing the mask on this show, but you can if you want to.
indeed. And thank you very much. I'm grateful to you that you're not wearing your masks while talking on the show, because your voice sounds very different, depending on whether you have one on or not. So thank you
Well,
for not doing that.
I've got this fancy mic too.
Yes, indeed. Okay. So,
So yes, with that, the only other thing that I would like to close up on, Maya, is the licking of sushi.
oh, right.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I heard about that, and it's really quite an unpleasant incident. And I think
It's
that, yeah, the
yeah,
damage to that sushi
it's
chain.
it's almost unheard of that a young kid, 17 years old,
Mm,
would put himself on TikTok, on YouTube, sitting at a what do you call it in English? The
a
rotisserie sushi.
Conveyor belt. I don't
Conveyor
know.
belt sushi, which is very
Sushi.
popular. It's very handy. It's convenient. It's cool. You can take your family. I don't think it's probably a place you would take a date, but it is an interesting environment where you order sushi visually or digitally from your table. Nobody comes and serves it to you. It comes on a conveyor belt. And as you're ordering specially for your what you want from the menu, there's also sushi that's going around to tempt you. And it would have the price on it, and then it would go by. And the third time it goes by, maybe you say, "What the hell? I haven't eaten that in a long time," and you grab it. So what this kid did was he filmed himself taking this sushi, licking it, and then putting it back. And then he would take the toothpicks and he would lick the toothpicks and put them back in the container. He would do the same thing with the soy sauce and the cups that are there on the table for you to make hot tea for yourself. He would be licking those, and this thing went viral. 40 million views on that. And the shocking thing, Maya, is that this has been going on. That video was shot 2 years ago. So when people are first seeing this, and you and I are only seeing this maybe over the last 2 weeks or so, it
Indeed,
became
yes.
a big issue. This video has been out for 2 years. So people, they look at that and they become disgusted and they go, "Oh my God, I've been going to this conveyor belt sushi with my family, 6 times over the last year, and now so the sales and the attendance to this conveyor belt sushi shop has diminished incredibly as a result of that. An interesting view of contemporary Japanese culture and society. It's not representative of what's going on, but it is somewhat indicative. I mean, you would never have thought of this. The sushi shop claims against the boy and his parents is rather meaningless because it's a kid. He's a juvenile. The parents aren't going to be paying for the damages that were generated as a consequence of that. I think it's just the sushi chain that is going to take the hit. And as a consequence of that, they are revamping how they serve sushi in these shops. They won't be the cups on the table anymore. You have to order the specific items. It's not going to be going around these tempting other morsels that you might purchase. The shoyu sauce now will probably be in little packets. It's just, the impact is just tremendous.
Yes, it is. And I have seen that actually during the past 2 weeks. There is a sushi, a kaiten sushi in our neighborhood, and we go there from time to time, and everything has changed just in, so quickly. So there is nothing already going around, as you
Yeah.
said, also just, yeah,
Several
everything.
of the shops over the last 2 weeks have actually closed, not permanently, but they've closed in order to take care of the logistics and the settings
Mhm.
inside the shop. But it's such a big deal. It's such a huge impact. But it's interesting because it has certain social and political implications. But it's something that I don't want to dwell too much on. But it is interesting because not everybody lives in Japan and is aware of these kinds of things that come up from time to time. Maya, with that, that's my briefing today. I'm sorry I went a little bit long. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about Japanese politics and what's going on and how things are developing. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much for taking it. And my question is, do you have any energy left to jump into the clubhouse and continue there?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
It's
that's good.
pretend energy, but I have it.
Okay, great. So let's go to Clubhouse. Let's move and
Okay.
continue with the questions and answers there.
I'll see you there. Thank